Welcome to Our Next Existence by Katie and the Chorus. I'm Katie, former technology strategist turned reluctant spiritual medium, and I channel messages from the Chorus, a group of beings just beyond our sensory perceptions who are loving, expansive, and who greatly enjoy sharing their perspective of us. Join us each week as we share and discuss their ideas about humanity's existence, purpose, and future. Concepts you can draw from to accelerate your path, expand your perceptions, and ultimately step into the flow of the universe and your life. Welcome back, everybody. I recently flew on a plane, which you might have guessed if you listened to last week's episode. If you had to guess, how much would you say that a commercial jet weighs? Like ballpark. I have recently discovered that many of them weigh in the high 200s of tons. The Airbus A380 weighs 394 tons. That's 788,000 pounds. It wasn't always true, was it? That we could fly something that heavy. Hundreds of years ago, if I said, I am going to fly a chunk of metal through the air at high speeds with people on it, and that chunk of metal is going to weigh 788,000 pounds, people would have looked at me like I was ridiculous. There's something powerfully telling in that response. The idea that something is absurd. Today, we turn away from it. But maybe one day in the not too distant future, when something sounds absurd, we might start to turn towards it. The Chorus has something to say about that today. They're going to talk about truth. And truth is kind of a big topic, so we're looking at a particular slice of it, I guess you could say today. Particular aspect of truth and how humans interact with it, much of which you are probably noticing in the world around you right now. In the first part of the episode, you'll hear directly from the Chorus, and then afterwards we will discuss. I hope you find in these messages even more of what's true for you. What is true to a human depends largely upon your beliefs and your perception of your own reality. If a human has lived a particular series of manifestations, that series often defines for that human what is true of life, of reality, and of possibility. If you take a collection of humans who have lived vastly different series of limitations, of manifestations, and ask them a series of questions about what they believe to be true, what you will often find are very different answers. What is true for someone who has grown up in the Congo might be different than what is true for someone who has grown up in the mountains. What is true for someone who has had what you would call a very hard life might be different than what is true for someone who has had what you might call a very luxurious life. Typically, your definitions of truth are so based upon experiences of five senses manifestations that it is difficult, as we have mentioned before, for you to relate to another being, to another human who has experienced a very different series of manifestations than your own. From our standpoint, this is quite amusing and quite a powerful tool of your own limitation. For in your inability to connect with what we would call a very similar set of manifestations between you and your fellow humans, you are unable to see more of the infinite that is around you. What will happen, beloved ones, when you encounter other beings who have lived series of manifestations that are very, very, very different than anything that any human here on your planet Earth could have ever experienced? Or, beloved ones, what will happen when you encounter other beings who have had experiences beyond the five senses manifestations? What do you think is true for those beings? What do you think is true for all of your fellow humans? And what, beloved one, is actually true for you? Are you not more than the sum of your five senses experiences? Are there not parts of you that are beginning to awaken, that exist, that are real, that are true, even if they do not yet show themselves on the five senses? What you will find as you expand energetically is an acknowledgement, an exception, a way of embracing more of what you are. And in so doing, you embrace more of what others are. You are not reduced to a series of opinions based upon five senses manifestations. Rather, you expand into a larger whole, a larger, more expanded version of what you are and what you each are. And in that way, you expand into more of other beings and other kinds of experiences and lifetimes and existences. And the linchpin of all of it is that it is all right for something to be true for you that is not true for any other member of creation. It is all right for something to be true for other beings and other species and other races throughout the galaxies that may not necessarily be true for a human. For if you continue to compare your five senses manifestations, you will find differences. But that does not unmake, that does not invalidate the true nature of what you are and what you are uniquely capable of doing. The secret is not in finding one truth that all members of a civilization must abide by. The love and the power of creation is in expanding into an infinite number of truths. We love you infinitely and truly. The weather is starting to turn cooler in the northern hemisphere of planet Earth right now. And I am going to make a prediction about a battle that is starting to loom on the horizon. And my prediction is this: that within the next few weeks, tiny humans, young humans, all over the Northern Hemisphere will refuse to put on their coats. Children like to make up their own rules, don't they? As the chorus has talked about many times, they view children as being in the same bucket of limitation as we are, but our view of the infinite universe is so narrow, is so small, that we see a pretty big difference between a child and an adult. Tiny harbingers of chaos, these children are. Because they're still connected in some evident ways to us to new energy. And one of the things that they love to do is they don't see things as true in the way that grown-ups do. So as the weather turns colder, as it is most obviously a change in temperature outdoors, and all of us old folk put on our coats, we get ready to walk to school in the morning, and we say, put on your coat. It's cold outside. It'll be cold on the way to school or at recess or whenever. Put on your coat. And what do children often say? No, I don't want to. And then if you're a new parent, you might still argue. But if you've been beaten down by children in the past, you know enough to know that it's not going to end well. So you just say, fine, suit yourself. Go outside. See how cold it is for yourself. And most children will take the bait and sort of go outside, stand in the snow flurry or whatever it is, the cold air. And many of them will still say, I'm not cold. I still don't want to. And off they go down the street or wherever it is they're going without a coat. And isn't there a part of us that really, really hopes that they get cold later and suffer and rue the moment that they said no to the coat? Why is that? What's that about? You might say, from a human perspective, that it's because we really want to be right. That there's some egotistical, as we often say, part of us that wants to be right in the parenting role and wants to know these things. And from a certain perspective, that's true. But from another perspective, from an energetic perspective, what might be happening in those moments between parents and children as the temperatures change all over the world? Is it really that simple? Is it really just parents need to be right because we're all egotistical humans? Or is there a larger energetic thing at play that has more to do with the objectives that we had in coming here and experiencing limitation? Today, the chorus threw down the topic of truth. Not a small topic by any stretch of the imagination, but they did it in a particular way to make a point related to something that we are all experiencing right now and will continue to for the foreseeable future, at least for those of us who choose it. And this aspect of truth that they brought up has to do with what you might call differences in series of manifestations, as the chorus called it, or as a human would be more apt to call differences of opinion. Now, from the chorus's perspective, looking down at us from an energetic lens, they view all manifestations as being sort of the result of our belief systems. And so they tend to look more closely at belief systems. Humans, on the other hand, focused on the five senses, physical outputs of those things. And so the chorus says, well, you have these beliefs about truth and how truth can only be based upon your five senses manifestations. And we say, well, chorus, I've lived this life. I have seen these things with my own eyes. And so I hold these opinions and these perspectives on life and myself. Now, these are actually saying the same thing. But now the difference becomes from the human perspective, we define truth by these experiences that we have had, because in our limited experience here, in our experience of limitation here, we do not allow ourselves to perceive or sometimes even contemplate perspectives and concepts that might contradict the opinions that we already hold based upon manifestations. Manifestations are the end all and be all of our reality, of our constructs, of how we view ourselves and what's possible. I'll give you an example. Let's start with human to human kind of comparisons because it's easier to start there energetically. Okay, so let's say you come across another human. You're hanging out at a bus stop or in line at a grocery store. So you don't really know this other human. It's just a casual, very casual encounter. And the other human says to you, I really like bubblegum. And you say, oh, I really like bubblegum too. And they say, I really like to blow bubbles. And you say, I do too. I thought it was really fun. I used to love it when I was a kid, something like that. And then the other human says, yeah, and I really love how every time I blow a bubble, it comes out in the shape of a pyramid. And you would probably laugh and say, what? And they would say, yeah, it's pretty cool. I blow pyramids all the time. Nice, pyramid shaped bubbles come out of my round mouth all of the time. Now, what is happening is that in that moment is as you are comparing experiences with this other human, unbeknownst to you, your mind and your belief systems are activating. And they are calling to mind all of your experiences blowing bubbles. And so for a moment in the start of the conversation, there is nothing that would tell you that that person's manifestation of blowing bubblegum was any different than yours. You are both in step. You are both following, mentally speaking, a series of manifestations until a point in the conversation where they present to you a manifestation, a pyramid-shaped bubblegum bubble that is completely outside of your series. You have never blown a pyramid-shaped bubble. You have never seen someone blow a pyramid-shaped bubble. You have never heard of someone blowing a pyramid-shaped bubble. There is nothing on any of the spectra that you allow yourself to perceive and recall that would tell you that that is possible. And the feeling of preposterousness that you get is the energetic perception of those beliefs being active and telling you there is a schism. There is now a gap. This person's series of manifestations is different than mine. Now, in a situation like this, it might be very easy for you to dismiss this rando in the grocery store line that is claiming to blow pyramid-shaped bubbles. Not a big deal. You have not an investment in this relationship. You don't even know who this person is. And so it is easy to dismiss. And that is often how our belief systems respond when there is not anything that goes too at odds with our series of manifestations, with our truth. It is easy for us to sort of deny its existence and turn away from it. As simple as saying, well, it was nice to meet you, and turning away from this crazy person in line with you and moving on with your life and not thinking anything else of it. Okay, so now we're going to take sort of a more palpable example where the series of manifestations are going to differ, but they're going to differ in a way that puts in question, in an even stronger way, your version of events, your version of truth, as the chorus would say. Okay, I want you to call to mind an experience when you were younger, because I know that if you're listening to this, it's true that at one point you were a child. See what I did there with truth? No? Okay. You will by the end of the episode. So recall a time, a sensation, I guess, when you were a child and you were going up against some authority figure about something that you wanted, that the authority figure did not think was right or safe or acceptable for you. It could be a parent, could be a teacher, a guardian, whoever. Let's say, just to get a little more specific, that it's about some social experience, some outing, a party that you wanted to go to. And you describe to this authority figure what it is and what will happen. So you say, oh, some friends of mine are getting together. We're all going to drive down and meet at this parking lot because we like to play basketball there and we're just going to hang out. And can I go? And the authority figure responds very strongly with an absolutely not. And then you, being a curious, inquisitive child that you still were, you might say, why? And they would say something to the effect of, well, it's not safe, obviously. Now, in your mind, this feels like a very casual, very okay, very all the other parents said yes kind of situation. You're not even asking for anything extreme. It's not like you're asking permission to go to a rave. And yet the authority figure has a very strong reaction in the negative. Now, what you might start to feel at this moment, even before the other person has started to go into their description of why, is a sense of preposterousness, a sense of absurdity. That's absurd. This isn't safe. It's a basketball court. That sensation starting to rise up within you is the beginning of your perception that there is a difference between your series and the other person's series of manifestations. Or said another way, a difference between your truth and the other person's truth. Energetically, what's happening in that situation is that both of you, billions of times per second, are activating beliefs about manifestations that you have each experienced that add up to a conjured mental projection of what that future experience will probably be like. And we've spent some time talking about mental projections. And so you know that they are often hinged into everything that's come before. And so while you, as the younger adolescent, have in your head your friends that you like to be with, basketball, cars, other experiences that you've had that all seem great and okay and safe, you do not know what series of mental projections the authority figure is calling into his or her mind, and all the things that he or she has lived in parking lots with cars, with basketball, with teenagers, has heard of in newspapers, recently from a friend on the neighborhood Facebook, or any other experience that they may have exposed themselves to, in which there is a different perception of how that future event is likely to go. And so where it seems okay to you as the adolescent, it seems not okay to mom or dad. And then maybe you press them for more of these details and you say, but why? Why are you so against the parking lot and basketball? And all my friends can go. And they say, because. And then they say stuff like, parking lots aren't safe after dark. And I don't like that friend because he looks like this guy who once was mean to me when I was a kid, right? They may not go into all of that detail, but they start listing these reasons that they see in that situation. And at this point, what do you as the adolescent typically say? Or what do we all say as humans? We say, but that's not true. That's not true about my friends. That's not true about this parking lot. That's not true about this situation that I see based on my own series of manifestations that is different than yours. This one's a little harder to blow off, isn't it? You, as the adolescent, are tied into this other person's version of truth in a different way than you are with someone you are just casually meeting at the grocery store who blows pyramid shaped bubbles. This difference in truth hits deeper. Why is that? From a five senses perspective, it would be easy to say because that authority figure holds a power over you, a decision making power, a freedom. And unless you convince them of your truth, you will be unable to go and have fun with your friends. And this is absolutely true from the game piece perspective. This is how it works in the game. We have beliefs about how we must align our truths in order to move forwards. It's subconscious, it's vast, and it's pervasive. All over the place, humans hold beliefs about the need to agree, and said more expansively or from the chorus's perspective, the need to agree on what is true. It happens all the time throughout our days. It happens all the time in the creation of our realities. It happens all the time in what we are capable of doing and what is possible. As we've said before, even if you want it to be true that you could build a house in a day, it is not true for the rest of our game players, for the rest of us. We have no manifestations in any of our existences that show that to be possible. So all over the place, these lines of manifestations tie us into limitation, essentially. They don't allow us to let in new and different possibilities if it's too far out of what has already manifested. And the chorus described this idea of truth today as being one of the fundamental ways that we limited ourselves. Because you can imagine if we have plotted through time over and over and over again by referring back to the series of manifestations that we each have individually lived, and we don't allow in much that is too different from that, the pace of progress, we might say is glacial. The pace of progress to someone from the chorus's perspective might say is hardly anything at all. And typically that's how it ends in a situation like this, isn't it? Between an adolescent human and an older, crankier human, is that they both turn away from the other's perspective. They dismiss it very naturally and very much as part of our experience of limitation. We do not open often to the possibility of something that is outside of our truth. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a third example, and I want this one to be even more visceral. I want you to feel what we feel when we sense a disparity in terms of truth, and then what happens as a result of that, I guess you could say. So let's pretend that you and I are going to go to a meeting, a very important meeting with a very important person. We are actually about to meet with the president of the entire world. And this president has something very important to relate to us. It's a pretty big deal, actually. So we get to the room and we knock, and he says, "Come in." And we open the door, and the room is empty and dimly lit, except for this man and a table, a giant empty table. And he says, "Come in. I'm glad you're here." So we walk over to the table. And you look at me like, "Katie, where the hell is this episode going?" I say, "Hold on, just stick with it. Stick with it. It'll be worth it." And the president begins. He says, I'm required to tell two of your kind about what's happening when we decide to make a decision like this. And so you two are the chosen ones. You two are the witnesses to this. And you say, okay, the witnesses to what? And he says, well, humanity is not doing so well. You all are entering another self-destructive phase. And you say, what do you mean by self-destructive? And he starts to lay out evidence, much of which you have heard, but maybe not all of it. So things like the environment is falling apart. There's war everywhere. There's disagreement everywhere. And he maybe cites a few examples that you've never heard of, but okay, you have a general sense of this stuff kind of happening. And so he says, well, we're only left with one choice. And you say, what's that? And he says, well, we have to eliminate the human race and try again. Now, at this point, you might feel a little bit of a what? Because even though there were moments where your two truths were lining up, now you have come to a very different conclusion. There is a disparity. And you say, well, why? Why? Excuse me? Did you just say that you're going to exterminate billions of people? And he says, well, of course. We've seen this happen so many times, and it's happening again. And you say, happen when? And then the president starts to lay out a history that you have never heard. It goes back into ancient times that you didn't even know humans existed during. He talks about a planet in our solar system that we destroyed. He talks about Mars and how we practically destroyed Mars. He talks about other civilizations in the galaxies that we had adversely affected prior to our arrival in the solar system, until finally we land on planet Earth and basically are able to confine ourselves here based on our own forgetfulness of what we are and everything we've done before. So by the time he's done, the empty table is now covered in pictures, artifacts, written accounts, videos, all sorts of technology or devices that you have never seen, but the table is covered. And then something very interesting happens for a human. You feel something very distinct. And it feels a little like something you say next. Gosh, Mr. President, I I didn't know. I guess. And the feeling that you have inside of you is that you potentially were wrong. Not just any kind of wrong. That the truth that you held when you walked into this room has now been realigned. Unbeknownst to you, the entire time that you've been listening to the president, there has been an ongoing activation of beliefs in the background, sort of calculating the growing disparity between your series of events and this person's. And miraculously, for our purposes of limitation, it does not tolerate to have two equally valid and different truths coincide. And so gradually and slowly, your version of truth gets recalibrated to be a little more in line, a little more synced up with this new version of human truth that is being created in that moment. So the president turns to you and he says, "Okay, good. So then you agree." And you say, "Agree? I agree that we should kill billions of people? I don't I." And he interrupts you and he says, "We know this is where you're headed. We know this is what you'll do again." And you interrupt him and you say, "But all of them? But everyone?" And he says, "Well, no, of course not. Everyone except for a few chosen survivors who will start to seed the human race again." And you open your mouth to object again, to try and say something. And he interrupts you and he says, "You're not here to be a decision maker. You're here to be a witness. Thank you for your service. I appreciate your time. You can go." And you and I walk out of the room. We close the door behind us and we stand in the hallway. And I turn to you and I say, "So, how do you feel?" And you say, "Katie, how do I feel? I mean, I just met the president of the world who really wants to destroy the human race, and apparently he's going to do that now." And I say, "Uh-huh, yeah. And how do you feel?" And you're such a combination of emotions, just sort of despair and anger and frustration, and you're not quite sure how to describe it. There just seems to be a lot happening. And then kind of one word bubbles up to the surface. And you say, I feel powerless. I feel powerless." And I say, "Yes, that's how you know." And you say, "That's how I know what?" And I say, "That's how you know you just gave up your truth. And it's everything we came here to experience." Every human, everywhere, has this capacity to know what's happening energetically in the background in their experience of limitation. Powerlessness is our perception of having given up our truth. It is not fundamentally true that you are powerless. And then I say, "Okay, but we're not done yet. We have to have that meeting again." And you say, "What? Why would we have that meeting again?" And I said, "Well, to make a point, obviously. So we're going to back up this whole meeting. We're going to go backwards in time. Okay, ready?" And you say, I guess so." So back up time, go back through the meeting, all the way back, and we're out at the door again, about to go in to meet the president of the world. And I turn to you and I say, "Okay, but this time I need to tell you something important before we go into this meeting." And you say, "Okay, what's that?" And I say, "He's not actually the president of the world." You say, "What?" I say, "Shh, don't keep your voice down. He's not actually the president of the world. He just thinks he is." And you say, "He thinks he's the president of the world?" And I say, "Yeah, he gets a little upset, if you point out that he's not actually the president of the world. So I just play along." I actually know the president of the world. She's somewhere else today. He's not it." And you go, "Okay. So now we're going to have a meeting with the fake president of the world?" And I say, "Yeah, let's do it." So we knock on the door And we hear him say, "Come in." And we walk into a room. It's dimly lit, except for a man and a bare table. We walk up to the table and he says, in a very solemn tone, "I'm glad you're here. There's something we need to discuss. I'm required to tell two of your kind before we make a decision like this." And I nod very solemnly, and then I kind of look at you out of the corner of my eye and give you a wink. And I say, "We understand, Mr. President." And he says, "The human race is not doing well." And you say, what do you mean?" And he starts to describe all of these things. We're sick. The environment's sick. We're fighting. Some of these things you've heard of, some of them you haven't. And you say, "Okay." And he says, "So that leaves us with only one choice." And you say, "What's that?" And he says, "We have to eliminate the human race." And you kind of look at me out of the corner of my eye, and I am nodding very solemnly with the president. And then you say, "Okay, but why? Why do we have to eliminate the human race?" And he says, "Well, you've been doing this for a long time, and you're doing it again." And you say, "How long of a time?" Then he lays out this history, this series of manifestations that you have never heard of before, about us destroying a planet and practically destroying Mars and being in other solar systems and galaxies before this one, in which we were a very destructive force and we adversely affected so many other civilizations until finally we end up on Earth. And by our own forgetfulness, basically exile ourselves here. And then he says, "So we will exterminate the majority of you, except for a few chosen survivors, and we'll start again." And I say, "Good plan, Mr. President. Thank you very much." And he says, "Thank you very much. You may go." And we walk out of the room. We close the door behind us. And I turn to you and I say, "So, how do you feel?" And you say, "After I had a meeting with the fake president of the world." And I say, "Yeah, how do you feel?" And you say, "I'm a little confused, but otherwise fine." And I say, "Exactly. What happened to your truth while you were in there?" And you say, "Well, I mean, I guess nothing. I mean, he's the fake president of the world. I don't even know if this guy's sane. He has an idea. He has ideas about how this is happening and what humans are doing." And I say, "Uh-huh." And then you say, "But it's not like he can do anything about it." And I say, "It's kind of all a matter of perspective, isn't it? The only thing that changed about his power between the first meeting and the second was your belief in it." Now we're coming around to what the chorus was talking about today when they spoke about humans and truth. That we all come from an infinite universe full of infinite versions of truth, but a universe that also expands infinitely to perfectly accommodate all those different versions. And in our incredible experience of limitation, we reduced all of that variety into a basically single version of truth that we all had to agree upon. It had to line up with a series of manifestations that we could recall that had come before. If we came across a different way of doing things, we would say, that's not true. We'd turn away from it. If we came across a different version of our history than we had allowed ourselves to recall, we said, that's preposterous. And if someone somewhere came up with an idea to do things differently than what we believed was the true way to go about it, we called it absurd. And now we are awakening. The versions of truth are multiplying. When you go out into your day, whether it be on the internet or in conversations with friends or at your workplace, what we are starting to encounter more and more are different versions of truth. People who have lived vastly different series of manifestations that not only are we able to perceive, but that we can't quite get rid of. As hard as some of us try, as hard as some of our beliefs still try, to realign things over and over again to a single set of truth, more truths keep popping up, don't they? It's like a big game of whack-a-mole. Just when you feel like you know what everyone agrees to, somebody shows up with a different idea. You could say that our inability to agree at the moment is a failing of the human race. Or you could say that our inability to agree at the moment is part of our awakening, part of our expansion into broader perspectives where we are able to perceive more and different series of manifestations and more and different versions of truth. And what we will continue to step into, potentially, is a stronger ability to sustain and to understand and to expand into our own truths, even in the midst of a universe of more truths than we ever knew were there. The chorus broached this question today, didn't they? They said, what will happen, beloved ones, when you encounter other beings, other civilizations, extraterrestrials, if you like that word, who have vastly different series of manifestations, which are true for them? It's not necessarily about how different will their manifestations be. It's about the question that a human will ask next, which is, who's right? And according to the chorus, the answer is very simple. Everyone is. On the one hand, from a perspective of limitation, you could look at that as a potential threat. If we can't all agree, must be chaos. The world would be upside down. And from a game piece perspective, that's true. But from another, equally valid perspective, the diversity of truths is the beginning of incredible experiences, of acceleration through all different ideas and possibilities, of encountering more solutions than you knew there ever could be. We are coming from a place and a belief system where we turned away from other truths, and we are moving into a place where we are able to turn towards them. And in our ability to allow for the existence of more and different truths, what we will find is an expanding truth within each of us. you will find out more things that are true for you. You will create, you will produce, you will experience even more compelling aspects of the unique being that you are. So much so that the next time you're at a grocery store and someone behind you starts talking about their ability to blow pyramid shaped bubbles, rather than sort of cringing and moving away as quickly as you can, you might turn towards that person and say, "Really? How do you do that?" And in the process of them describing their ideas of physics and their reality and what they've lived and how they seemingly make sharp corners out of potentially viscous materials, not only do you potentially learn how to blow pyramid shaped bubbles, but in the process, you come to a new understanding of everything you had thought was true about your own experience of bubbles, of physics, of air, of materials. It might even be like that when you look at the news or hear someone on a podium or hear neighbors talking about things that are not true for you. They are not the president of the world. They're just blowing pyramid shaped bubbles. They're just sharing what's true for them. Doesn't necessarily have to be true for you. And at times, we may still feel threatened by the presence of another and diverging truth. But what we are moving into is a sublime recognition that the universe is full of bubbles. And I don't know about you, but I would like to see as many pyramids as I possibly can. So let's return to the matter at hand, which is how to get tiny humans to put on their coats. As we watch them step out into the cold, defiant, refusing to put on their jackets, and there's that part of us that hopes that they suffer, that hopes that they realize that they're cold and come running back to us for the jacket that we insisted upon. What's really happening within us are the activations of beliefs that had been formed to not tolerate divergent truth. That's what you're feeling. You're feeling the argument for, the fight for a singular truth. But do you know what we do sometimes these days, miraculously? We let the kids run out the door without the jacket. And sometimes we just drop it on the floor and walk out after them. We let it go. We may even enjoy the cold morning as our tiny persons around us frolic and skip and look at the leaves and run around. They without their jackets and us in our jackets. And for a moment before any other beliefs are activated, it is nothing less than the incredible experience of two different truths coinciding, where neither the parent nor the child needs the other person to align to their truth in order to enjoy a beautiful morning. Is it potentially true that some little people don't yet experience insufficient body heat the way that we do? Could it be true that they don't need a jacket like we do? Up to you. being able to withstand any temperatures without the need of a coat sounds pretty cool. At least I hope that's true. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you found these messages to be helpful. May they accelerate you on your path wherever you'd like it to go. For more information, check out our website at katieandthechorus.com. There you will find show quotes, episode transcripts, details on our book, The Book of Human Awakening, as well as our newsletter sign up. Visit katieandthechorus.com. Thanks again. See you next time.